And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Lanslone Show. I am rolling solo today, and that's because I had a lot that I wanted to say. There are a lot of really big stories that I don't think are getting enough attention and in-depth coverage. So I wanted to really take some time on those issues today. That includes what's going on in the West Bank. Trump still doesn't understand Ukraine, and of course, Jolani's visit to the White House. So let's start off here with news in the West Bank. Israel has shut down a Palestinian town and is taking over homes. This is an article I wrote for judgenap.com, by the way. I write articles at the Institute, judgenap.com, a lot of places. Follow me on Twitter. I post all of them there. And this is a town in the northern West Bank where Israel's conducting raids. So they shut down all the roads getting in and out of the towns except one. And that road is manned by an Israeli checkpoint, and residents are saying they're not allowed to really enter and leave. The Israeli raids are happening right around where the schools are, and this is causing major dysfunction for the children of the town. Of course, you got to walk past armed people to get to school, forcing them to move to online education. This is just a total mess there. But really, to me, the part about this story I really want to highlight that I think as Americans we should all pay particular attention to and really be upset by is that the Israeli military is actually quartering in the homes of Palestinians. Right? This was one of the major issues that drove the American colonists to rebel against the king, ultimately have a revolution, declare independence, right? Was that they were putting British soldiers in the homes of Americans, colonists at the time. Now, here they are kicking out the Palestinians. They're not even letting them get back into the home to say, get some toiletries, get some clothing, get medication. If there's young kids in the home, they got favorite toys and stuff like that. They can't have that. So it's really been a disaster for the Palestinians there. But this is just goes to show the level of apartheid and dehumanization that the Israelis have inflicted on the Palestinians, where they could just go into a Palestinian town or village. Imagine wherever you live, your entire town, city, whatever it is, all the roads are closed except one to get in and out. So for most people to go to work, to visit family, to, maybe go to the grocery store, get other supplies, you have to go through a military checkpoint where the people at that checkpoint have killed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other people in the West Bank that were just driving up to a checkpoint. Like, there's a real risk for the Palestinians to just cross an Israeli checkpoint. And then they're carrying out raids every single day in your town. They're going into a new home, completely destroying everything, ripping out all the drawers, throwing everything all over the place, breaking the cooking supplies, the family photos, the heirlooms, stealing whatever is of value, and then leaving, maybe arresting a couple family members in all the chaos and things like that. And they're doing this day after day after day. This has been going on for almost an entire week in this Palestinian town. And this is just one example of what's happening all across the West Bank. And so Trump is pretending, the American media and a lot of the establishment across the political spectrum are pretending that Trump achieved this ceasefire in Gaza and suddenly there's peace in the Middle East. But what Israel has done is they've taken this opportunity. Okay, we're not bombing Gaza as much. We're going to take some of those military forces and essentially redeploy them to the West Bank. And they're harassing people day after day after day. And maybe the worst thing that the Israeli military is doing in the West Bank is they're only enforcing law on one side. And so you will have a group of Israeli settlers come and beat a bunch of Palestinians attempting to, shepherd sheep or pit some olives or something like that. And if they fight back, the Israeli military will come and arrest the Palestinians. They won't arrest the aggressors. And they will sometimes just sit there with their guns and watch as men with sticks beat women, beat the elderly, beat children, and do absolutely nothing about it, right? They're trying to completely dehumanize and take over the West Bank. Betsel Smoltrich has said they're moving towards annexation, that they've completely buried the idea of ever having a Palestinian state because the new Israeli settlement expansion will actually cut the Palestinian areas of the West Bank in two. They are moving towards annexation. And of course, they're doing this, and the result is going to be making sure that Trump's 20-point peace plan for the Middle East, the ceasefire in Gaza, doesn't take hold. One of the very key points on that agreement, and this was not just something that was pushed by Hamas, but was pushed by the Qataris, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Saudis, was that Israel will not annex the West Bank. And Israel is pushing right ahead with annexing the West Bank. And nothing from the White House on this. They're claiming that this deal is done. Trump has achieved peace in the Middle East for the first time in 3,000 years. There's not worried people in the Middle East, according to President Donald Trump. This is just absolutely untrue. Now, can't talk about the Palestinians without at least mentioning the situation in Gaza. Another article that I recently covered this week that, again, isn't getting media attention, but just goes to show how cruel the Israelis are to the Palestinians. UNICEF is trying to take advantage of the ceasefire to hold a vaccination campaign for the Palestinian children, many of who have been born in recent years or are very young, haven't been able to get their annual vaccines over the past 2 years as Israel has completely destroyed the infrastructure. It's been unsafe to travel. Millions of people are living in tents. So they're going to take advantage and they're going to vaccinate all these kids. Israel allows the vaccines in, but then not the syringes. So they can't give them. They're refusing to allow in refrigeration units with solar panels, which you need to preserve the vaccines once you get them to the field hospitals that you're trying to give the vaccinations at. And so they're completely stifling and preventing this vaccination campaign from taking place. This is all a part of their scheme to squash this ceasefire. And of course, I think a lot of this all has to do with Benjamin Netanyahu is in the middle of a corruption trial. And that's why just today, a few hours ago, President Donald Trump sent a letter to the Israeli president. Now, in Israel, the president is mostly just a figurehead. The power rests with the prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. However, the president, Isaac Herzog, does have one power, and that's the power to grant pardons. And Donald Trump is asking for a pardon for Netanyahu. I think this is interesting because it's almost a little bit of an admission from Donald Trump that Netanyahu is doing this in Gaza, that he is waging all these aggressive wars, attacking Iran, attacking Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, all these countries that Israel is attacking. They are doing so because Netanyahu can't let Israel be at peace, because then he doesn't have excuses to not show up at court for his corruption trial. Oh, I was scheduled to be in court today for corruption, but we're in the middle of a war with Iran right now, so prime minister's too busy. Now, we're bombing Lebanon more, a major attack from Hamas in Gaza or something. There's all these excuses that Benjamin Netanyahu has as long as these conflicts are going on. So next up, want to talk about the war in Ukraine. There's been some pretty major changes over the past week. Again, very little coverage on this. Russia has taken one of the very key cities left in the Donbass. After they take this city, they are going to basically have open fields between them and the rest of the territory that Russia has annexed in Ukraine. So this is a really major victory for the Russians, likely going to lead to breakthroughs. But not only that, we're seeing the Ukrainians lose territory across the front lines. In the north in Kharkiv, and in the south in Zaporizhia and Kherson, they're losing multiple villages every single month now. And for a war that had relatively stagnant front lines, and when Russia's strategy isn't necessarily to take territory, this is likely very significant. It means the Ukrainian front lines that have been stretched thin to the point of breaking, Kiev has either decided to kind of retract those fortifications, move back, and maybe try to hold less territory, thinking that you're going to need less soldiers to do that, or it's starting to break, that they've really overcommitted to defending all this territory. They've blustered about being able to retake all of Ukraine. That simply can't happen. And so now they put themselves in a position where not only are they going to lose territory, but the front lines could collapse and they could lose a massive amount of territory all at one time. Now, as this is unfolding, this is what Trump had to say about the situation in Ukraine.
Look at the damage that Russia, Ukraine has done to us as a country. I mean, we spent $350 billion. We're not spending any money anymore. Now they pay us through NATO. You know, I got NATO to go from 2% to 5%. Well, that's very important. When you're president, you really sort of have to watch over the world because you're going to be dragged into it. Otherwise, you're going to be dragged into a world war. I think if I weren't president, first of all, that war would have never happened if I was president. And if I weren't president, that war could have led to World War III. It won't. It's not going to anymore. But when I first got in, I said, wow, this situation could lead to World War III. And I got NATO together. I got everybody together.
So many things that Trump gets wrong in this clip, and I want to hit on a few of them, but I think the most important is that Trump thinks this war is somehow de-escalated from when he became president, when in fact the opposite is true, that this war has escalated. Now, Trump likes to brag that, oh, Biden was sending the Ukrainians $2 billion, $3 billion in weapons every single month. I'm not doing that. But he's selling the weapons to Europe to give to the Ukrainians. And from the perspective of the Russians, that's not a de-escalation. That's not a climb down. Ukraine is still getting the weapons. And so that hasn't de-escalated the tensions. And in fact, Trump has taken several steps to escalate the tensions between the US and Ukraine. Now, he has talked with the Russians, which I do think is a step in the right direction. The Biden administration all but refused to do that entirely. Just, we're not going to meet with you. The actual policy of the Biden administration is we're not going to discuss the war in Ukraine with the Russians. When Antony Blinken, I think he talked with Lavrov to secure the release of Brittany Grenier, a WNBA player, he specifically said, he bragged that he would not discuss with the Russians ending the war in Ukraine or anything about Ukraine. This was merely a prisoner swap, wouldn't be rolled over to lead to more diplomacy or anything like that. So that we've shifted away from that policy is a good thing. But then Trump goes and sanctions two Russian oil giants. Trump goes and gives Ukraine intelligence to hit Russian oil refineries far from the front lines. These are viewed as major provocations from Russia. And more problematic is that Russia responds to these provocations. They don't just, Trump thinks all these countries are just going to take it on the chin, right? If we increase long-range drone strikes into Russia, then this is going to ultimately hurt Russia's ability to produce energy and provide electricity to its citizens and increase pressure on Moscow. When in reality, what happens is Moscow just does fivefold back to Ukraine what Ukraine is doing to Russia. And so maybe there are 20,000 Russians who have experienced power outages over the past few weeks. The number for the Ukrainians is in the hundreds of thousands or the millions. Right? There's widespread blackouts and power outages. There's no even thought in several areas of Ukraine at this point that people could have power 24 hours a day, and we're entering winter. Russia is talking about a very small number of people in a border region who are suffering when it's attacks now across all of Ukraine. Maybe the most important point on all of this is what I have been trying to hammer home since the beginning of the Trump administration. Even if the money were there, the weapons simply are not, and they're not effective enough. And we just got more evidence of this just today, actually. ABC News got a hold of data from the Ukrainian Air Force that showed less than 80% of Russian drones were intercepted in the month of October, and this is down from 90% at the start of the year and 85% in September. So Russia is clearly getting more proficient, and the missile ratio is even worse, with at best they're able to intercept a Russian missile 37% of the time at this point. And so the Russian munitions are getting through. They're hammering the Ukrainians, and we don't produce enough interceptors. We only produce 3 Patriot systems a year. We only produce 600 Patriot interceptors a year. And Russia could produce far, far more missiles than that. the missiles are cheaper to produce. They could produce decoy missiles, decoy drones. And so it's simply not sustainable. And this is becoming more and more obvious on the battlefield. But you don't hear any reckoning, any acknowledgement of this from Donald Trump. He thinks that this war has de-escalated when really we're now on the razor's edge more than ever in Ukraine, because Ukraine is more and more desperate. That means Ukraine is going to lash out and conduct more and more daring strikes inside of Russia that are only going to provoke bigger and bigger responses from the Kremlin. And so while Trump is going to pretend that we've walked back from this brink, that's really not the case. Now, additionally, I gotta say this, and I know I made this point before, but I think it's so important. And Trump kind of gets away with this because of how bad Joe Biden's Russia policy was. But this is Joe Biden's war. This war would have never happened if I were president. Well, this war actually only happened because Donald Trump was president. Because Donald Trump, during his administration, massively ratcheted up the economic war against Russia. He increased the military support to Ukraine, including transferring Javelin and Stinger missiles to the Ukrainians. And most importantly, he really set the stage for the diplomatic relationship between Moscow and Washington to be at a bare minimum entering the Biden administration, because he was duped by a fake chemical weapons agent attack in the UK that didn't even kill a former Russian spy, and ended up expelling dozens of Russian diplomats in response to this, ended up closing Russian consulates in the United States because of this. Donald Trump has not effectively managed the U.S.-Russian relationship. He has not in any way improved the U.S.-Russian relationship. And most importantly, he has not maintained the arms control between the U.S. and Russia. During his first administration, got out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was absolutely key to preventing land-based cruise missiles with nuclear warheads being deployed to Europe or anywhere around the world. That was really important. Trump got rid of that. He also got rid of the Open Skies Treaty, which was really important to monitoring. And next, we're looking at the New START Treaty. This is the agreement, the only agreement that governs the two largest nuclear stockpiles in the world, the US and Russia. It's already been diminished. There's not the inspections going on, and both sides have indicated they're willing to walk back some of their commitments to this agreement, but it is still in place. It's set to expire in February, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, had some recent remarks on it I want to get into.
The constructive initiative put forward by President Vladimir Putin in the post-New START context speaks for itself. It contains no hidden agenda and is perfectly clear for understanding. Its practical implementation would not require any special additional efforts. Therefore, we do not consider it necessary to hold in-depth discussions on this proposal. The only thing required is reciprocity from the United States. We will voluntarily adhere to the restrictions only if, and precisely for as long as, the other side does the same. Naturally, should the Americans have any questions, they are free to raise them with us. So far, there has been no substantive response from Washington. We have been informed through diplomatic channels that the issue is under consideration. We have no intention of keeping persuading anyone. We believe that our step serves the interests of both parties and the entire international community. We are ready for any development of events while hoping for a positive outcome.
So what Russia did here was really critical and really important. Arms control agreements take a long time to negotiate. It takes, I've heard that for a memo to get from a low-level official in the State Department to the Secretary of State, it goes through 40 hands or something like that. And so for the U.S. and Russia to be able to begin negotiations on a new arms control agreement, it's going to take months, half a year, maybe a full year to actually get from early discussions to the signing ceremony. And so with less than a year to go on the New START treaty, Russia offering to extend this a year, absolute no-brainer. Go ahead and extend it, and then you could enter into negotiations on maybe reviving some of the old arms control agreements or reworking New START to a more practical agreement for, I guess, 2026. Rather than doing that, the Americans aren't negotiating. And I could almost guarantee you, because he did this during his first administration, what Trump's next steps are going to be. Rather than trying to come up with a simple, quick solution to extend New START and to be able to enter into the long negotiation process needed to hammer out a deal, he's going to go to the Russians and say, you need to bring the Chinese into a trilateral nuclear arms control pact that Beijing will never agree to, that Moscow doesn't have the ability to pressure Beijing to agree to. But Trump's going to draw a red line and say, if China won't enter this agreement, then it's going to die. And that's ultimately what's going to kill it. Trump is an absolute novice and inept when it comes to geopolitics. He thinks everything is a New York City real estate deal. But there, he was never playing on fair grounds. And it really didn't matter to him and the other person if you lost, where we're talking about core national interest of these other countries, right? China views their much smaller nuclear program than the US and Russia as a deficit. And so they're not going to enter an agreement to stop building nuclear weapons when they have 10% of the nuclear weapons that the US has. Simply not going to happen. If the US did want to negotiate a trilateral arms control agreement with Russia and China, again, you got to extend New START to make sure that there is some kind of framework in place for the world's two largest nuclear stockpiles. And then you could bring the Chinese in and maybe at the end try to find some way to incorporate them in make it about percentages rather than firm numbers. And so every country agrees not to have 10% of their weapons or something like that actively deployed versus 100%, right? Like, look at agreements like that. And so there's a lot that could be done on this front. The situation is ripe. If Trump really wanted to hang a Nobel Peace Prize around his neck, he could do something that would put a lot of the world at ease, significantly reduce the chances of nuclear warfare. And yet, he doesn't even think this is a threat. He doesn't understand how to get this done. He doesn't understand the reality of the situation. It's in part Trump's own deficits and also the people he surrounded himself with. Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio are not capable of delivering to Trump the reality of the situation and explaining to him an effective solution. Their Hegseth, I think, is just an utter fool and figurehead, and Rubio's a hardcore war hawk. And so Trump is allowing the war hawks to lead his foreign policy. All right, so before we wrap up here today, I cannot let this go. Former Al-Qaeda leader visits the White House and then has a sit down on Fox News. Want to play a couple clips from that? Here's the first one.
President Trump raised with you, discussed with you, your own past affiliation with Al-Qaeda terrorism?
I think this is a matter of the past now. We did not discuss this actively. We talked about the president and the future. We talked about the investment opportunities in the future in Syria, and so that Syria is no longer looked at as a security threat. It is now looked at as a geopolitical ally, and it's a place where the United States can have great investments, especially extracting gas.
So I just want to really highlight how significant this is. Fox News, for 2.5 decades, has been the biggest source of ratcheting up fear and demanding that the U.S. conduct drone strikes in the Middle East, kill terrorists, war, more involvement in the Middle East. Fox News has been the main driver of that. And now they let the former Al-Qaeda commander, deputy commander of ISIS, a man who actually fought against the United States during the Iraq War for Al-Qaeda in Iraq, right? Like, this is the most serious jihadist maybe on the planet right now. And he's welcomed into a Fox News studio, given a friendly interview. I don't even know how to describe what I'm witnessing here. As somebody who grew up during the terror war, 9/11 happened when I was 10, almost 11 years old. Every single day there was coverage on Fox News about how we need to get the terrorist. From the time I was 10 years old into the time I was 25, 26, that was their daily message. We got to get the terrorists. Whenever it came to foreign policy, that's all they told Americans. We got to kill more terrorists. We got to kill more terrorists. Now they invite a terrorist into their studio, give him, I'm guessing, a very qualified makeup artist, dress him in a suit. He looks better than Zelensky there, and gives him a friendly interview and parades him in front of the American people like this is Syria's George Washington, that he's going to usher the country from the dark days of the Assad dictatorship into the enlightened period of the country, when he's a jihadist. He's an Islamist. He's installed Sharia law in Syria that didn't exist before. His government has literally carried out ethnic massacres in just the 1 year since they've been in power. He didn't even bother to staff his government with Syrians, with normal independent Syrians. He took all the former commanders of his jihadist militia, including people not even from Syria, and stuck them in senior leadership positions. People who were actually sanctioned by the United States government. He himself was sanctioned by the US government from being a terrorist. The State Department put out a wanted poster, had a $10 million bounty on this guy's head because he wanted to wage jihad against the United States of America, because he was involved in organizations that conducted suicide bombings against US troops, that committed horrific, unspeakable atrocities against the people of the Levant, and led a jihadist revolution that overthrew the government in Damascus. This man is an absolute evil, evil, evil person. And he was just invited on Fox News. It's unspeakable. And then they're talking to him about his meeting with Donald Trump, and Trump doesn't even ask him about this. And the media is not in outrage. Remember when Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin during his first term, and the media was upset that he didn't press Putin on the fake election hacking claims? And now they're not even upset that he didn't ask the former commander, the former founder of Al Qaeda in Syria, about being in Al Qaeda, about fighting against the United States in the Iraq War. What the hell is going on? I really don't understand the reality. I really do struggle to understand this reality that I'm living in, where this man has been welcomed into the White House. He should be arrested. The only way that man should have ever been in the White House, if he had handcuffs behind his back, on his knees, and Donald Trump was standing over him saying, "We got him, folks. We caught the main Al Qaeda commander. This was a huge achievement. Thank God for our military." No, our military defended, allowed him to come to the United States of America. This is just, I really do struggle with this. I mean, I was hoping maybe they were going to reroute his plane to Guantanamo Bay and just leave him there. I can't comprehend how he could be welcomed in the United States of America. You know, maybe he appoints some foreign minister who's never been tied to a jihadist in the past, and that guy is welcomed in the United States. That would be offensive enough, but this is just insane. And it's not only the photo op that's going on here, there's a lot going on behind the scenes to prop up Abu Mohammed al-Jolani in Syria. The United States is removing sanctions on him. They're removing sanctions on other jihadists in his government, and they're pushing the United Nations to do it as well. Jolani is actually a sanctioned man. He's a blacklisted man by the United Nations for committing atrocities, for being a terrorist. No country in the world is supposed to do business with Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, and he's welcomed into the White House. That, and then another very big one coming up here is the United States is actually putting our soldiers at a Syrian military base near Damascus in order to monitor a ceasefire agreement with between Israel and Syria. Now, we have played this game before, and it ended up with 3 U.S. soldiers being killed in Jordan. Whenever we welcome jihadists into areas where there are U.S. soldiers, they kill U.S. soldiers. Make no doubt about it. Every single American that Donald Trump sends to Syria to this airbase is being put in harm's way by the President of the United States of America. This should be an outrage. This should be something that the Democrats are hammering Trump on around the clock. It's one of those issues where no matter what, when they ask them about healthcare, they say, well, we could have a debate about healthcare, but Trump is inviting literal terrorists to the White House, so we have to talk. There's none of that. None of that. Now, one last clip of Jolani here speaking with Fox News. This is him discussing 9/11. Oh, all right. So actually, I got another clip here. President Donald Trump discussing Jolani.
Become a country that's very successful, and I think this leader can do it. I really do. I think this leader can do it. And people said he's had a rough past. We've all had rough pasts, but he has had a rough past. And I think, frankly, if you didn't have a rough past, you wouldn't have a chance. He gets along very well with Turkey, with President Erdogan, who's a great leader. Erdogan's a great leader and very much in favor of what's happening in Syria. We have to make Syria work. Syria is a big part of the Middle East. And I will tell you, I think it is working and really well. We're working also with Israel on, getting along with Syria, getting along with everybody.
So he has a rough past. No, he was an avowed enemy of the United States of America. He fought against the United States of America. He was the leader of an organization dedicated to waging jihad against the United States of America. That's not a rough past. That's a war criminal. That's an enemy of me, you, and every other tax-paying American. And Donald Trump ushers him into the White House, brings him into the White House, gives him this great photo op and opportunity, is welcoming Jolani Syria back into the international order because Bashar al-Assad is gone. It's too much to really comment on. Now, I do want to play this last clip of Jolani. We got it loaded up now on Fox News, speaking about the reaction to 9/11 in the Middle East.
On 9/11, at the time,
anyone who lived in the Islamic or Arab world at the time who tells you he wasn't happy about it would be lying.
So this wasn't an interview with Fox News, separate interview here. But this really wasn't necessarily true across the Muslim world. There were certainly, a lot of people within the Muslim world, but most of those people were within, his Sunni, more Islamist style movement. And, he's making it out to be that's not the case. And on Fox News, he really downplays how upset he was about 9/11. So, I mean, this should be incredibly offensive to all Americans. We should be absolutely rebelling against this policy, demanding, probably Donald Trump resign over this. This is an utter humiliate. I feel utterly humiliated as an American right now because of this. And we can't stand for this. We have to make a big deal out of these kinds of things, or else they're just going to keep getting away with it and, bringing more terrorists and evil people to the White House. I guess they already got Zelensky and Netanyahu in, so what the hell, will add an Al-Qaeda terrorist to the list. That will do it for the show today, guys. Got some big shows coming up soon. Dave DeCamp returns tomorrow, and Craig Pasta Jardula, my buddy, very excited to be talking to him on Monday. So if you don't want to miss those episodes, be sure you subscribe to the show. Best place to do that is on YouTube. Of course, we do post the shows on Facebook, Rumble. They are available in podcast form, so plenty of easy place to get the show. And I really appreciate y'all's support. We'll be back with more shows tomorrow.